From callers like Fu Manchu and Bingo, Mazie hears considerable gossip about the sleazy underworld of Chinatown. She says she never repeats such gossip, not even to her sisters. Detectives know that she has many Chinese friends and sometimes stop at her cage and ask apparently innocent questions about them. She shrugs her shoulders and says, "No speak English." In general, however, she cooperates with the police. Drunken tourists often come down to Bowery joints to see life, and when she notices them stumbling around Chatham Square, she telephones the Oak Street station. "Such dopes are always getting rolled by bums," she says. "I got no sympathy for out-of-towners, but bums are the clumsiest thieves in the world. They always get caught, and it's best to get temptation out of their way." Although her language frequently shocks the Oak Street cops, they admire Mazie. Detective Kane, for instance, says that she has the roughest tongue and the softest heart in the 3rd Precinct. "She knows this neighborhood like a farmer knows his farm," he says. "I believe she's got the second sight. If anything out of the way is happening anywhere along the Bowery, she senses it." Detective Kane has for some time been trying to solve a mystery in which Mazie is involved. Mazie has a telephone in her booth, of course, and in June 1929, a man whose voice she did not recognize began calling her daily at 5 p.m., asking for a date, making cryptic remarks such as, "They got the road closed, Mazie. They won't let nobody through." After 3 months, he stopped calling. Then around Christmas of the following year, he began again. He's been calling intermittently ever since. "I won't hear from him for maybe 6 months," Mazie says. "Then one day around 5, the phone will ring and his voice will say, 'All the clocks have stopped running,' or 'Mazie, they cut down the big oak tree,' or some other dopey remark. He never says more than a few words, and when I say something, he hangs right up. One afternoon, he gave me the shakes. He called up and said, 'Mazie, I got a nephew studying to be an undertaker, and he needs somebody to practice on.' Then he hung up. A minute later, he called again and said, 'You'll do. You'll do.' Somehow I got the feeling he's across the street in a booth. The worst thing is I suspect every stranger that buys a ticket. I strike up conversations with strangers just to see if I can find one who talks like him. I think he's trying to drive me crazy." Among her friends, Mazie refers to her caller as the man. If she has visitors around 5 o'clock and the telephone rings, she says, "Pick up the receiver and see what the man has to say this time." Fanny Hirsch once listened. "It was macabre," she said. Detective Kane has listened often, has warned the man, and has tried vainly to trace the calls. Mazie's number has been changed repeatedly, but that does no good. Mazie closes her cage shortly after 11 p.m., when the final show is underway, and she goes to an all-night diner near Brooklyn Bridge, where she glances through the daily news while having a couple of cups of coffee and a honey bun. The only thing in the news that she regularly reads from the beginning to end are the comics, the voice of the people, and the inquiring photographer. She says she doesn't read political or war stories because she can't understand them and because they make her blue. "The world is all bitched up," she once said. "Always was, always will be." "Do you really believe that?" she was asked. "Nah," she said after a moment of deliberation. "I guess I don't." She spends half an hour in the diner. Then, practically every night, before going home to bed, she makes a Samaritan tour of the Bowery and its environs. She carries an umbrella and a large handbag, which contains a flashlight, a number of cakes of soap of the size found in hotel bathrooms, and a supply of nickels, dimes, and quarters. If it is a cold night, she goes first to an alley near the steps leading to the footwalk of Manhattan Bridge. Bums like to keep fires going in discarded oil drums in this alley. She distributes some change. Then she inspects Columbus Park, a block west of Chatham Square, where every winter a few bums pass out on benches and die of exposure. The police say Mazie has rescued scores of men in this park. Then, passing through Chinatown, she returns to the Bowery and heads uptown, pausing whenever she recognizes a bum and giving him enough money for a meal, a drink, or a flop. Frequently, in addition to small change, she gives a bum a cake of soap. "Please use it, buddy," she says pleadingly. Here and there she gets out her flashlight and peers into a doorway. She pays particular attention to the drunken or exhausted bums who sleep in doorways, on loading platforms, and on sidewalks. She always tries to arouse them and stake them to flops. In warm weather, if they don't seem disposed to stir, she leaves them where they are. Sidewalk is about as nice as a flophouse cot in the summertime, she says. You may get up stiff, but you won't get up crummy. In the winter, however, she badgers them until they awaken. She punches them in the ribs with her umbrella, and if necessary, gets down on her knees and slaps their faces. When a bum is sleeping off his load, you could saw off his leg and he wouldn't notice nothing, she says. Sometimes a bum who's been awakened by Mazie tries to take a poke at her. When this happens, she assumes a spraddle-legged stance, like a fencer, and jabs the air viciously with her umbrella. Stand back, she cries, or I'll put your eyes out. If the man is too weak, sodden, or spiritless to get up, Mazie grabs his elbows and heaves him to his feet. Holding him erect, she guides him to the nearest flophouse and pulls and pushes him up the stairs to the lobby. She pays the clerk for the man's lodging. 30 cents is the customary price, and insists on his having at least 2 blankets. Then, with the help of the clerk or the bouncer, she takes off the man's shoes and buttons his collar, loosens his belt, and puts him to bed with his clothes on. This is usually a tumultuous process, and sometimes many of the lodgers are awakened. They stick their heads out of the doors of their cubicles. It's Mazie, they shout. Hello, Mazie. Now and then an emotional bum will walk out in his underwear and insist on shaking Mazie's hand. God bless you, Mazie, old girl, he will cry. Mazie does not approve of such antics. Go back to bed, you old goat, she says. If she is acquainted with the clerk and trusts him, she leaves some change with him and asks that it be given to the bum when he wakes up. Flophouses are for men-only establishments, and Mazie is the only female who has ever crossed the threshold of many of them. At least a couple of times a week, Mazie finds injured men lying in the street. On these occasions, she telephones police headquarters and asks for an ambulance from Governor or Beekman Street, the hospitals which take care of most Bowery cases. She knows many of the drivers from these hospitals by name and orders them around. Police say she summons more ambulances than any other private citizen in town, and she is proud of this. I don't overdo it, she says. Unless a man is all stove up and bloody, I don't put in a call. But if I had my way, the wagons would be rolling all night long. There's hardly a bum on the Bowery who don't belong in a hospital. On her walk, Mazie usually tries to steer clear of other well-known nocturnal Bowery characters. Among these are the widow woman and the crybaby. The crybaby is an old mission bum who sits on the curb for hours with his feet in the gutter, sobbing brokenly. Once Mazie nudged him on the shoulder and asked, What's the matter with you? I committed the unforgivable sin, he said. Mazie asked him what the sin consisted of, and he began a theological description of it, which she didn't understand, which he interrupted after a few minutes, remarking, Hell, crybaby, you didn't commit no sin. You probably just got the stomach ulcers. The widow woman is a bent, whining crone who wears a mourning veil, a Queen Mary hat, and a rusty black coat, and comes hobbling down the Bowery around midnight, giving bums little slips of paper on which are scribbled such statements as, God is love, and the fires of hell will burn forever. Mazie is afraid of her. She walks like a woman, she dresses like a woman, but when she talks, I get the feeling that she's a man. Most nights before going home to bed, which is usually around 2 o'clock, Mazie makes brief stops in several saloons and all-night restaurants. She does not mind the reek of stale beer, greasy cabbage, and disinfectant in them. After you've been around the Bowery a few years, your nose gets all wore out, she says. She goes into these places not to eat or drink, but to gossip with bartenders and countermen, and to listen to the conversation of drunken bums. She has found that bums do not talk much about sex, sports, politics, or business, the normal saloon topics. She says most of them are far too undernourished to have any interest in sex. They talk instead about what big shots they were before they hit the Bowery. Although the stories fascinate her, Mazie is generally cynical. To hear them tell it, she says, all the bums in the Bowery were knocking off millions down in Wall Street when they were young. Else they were senators, else they were the general manager, something real big. But poor fellows. The most of them, there wasn't ever nothing but drunks.